Welcome to the very first episode of Unblock Your BS Podcast. It has taken me 4 years to get to this point. So, in full disclosure, I actually have a completely separate business that I'm now starting to phase out, but I've had a podcast on that for 8 years. It's done 750,000 downloads. Like, I'm not new to podcasting, but it has not been this content. It's been business coaching for salon and spa owners. And so I am very excited to be able to take the little snippets and tidbits and short videos and short form content on TikTok and other social media platforms and start to elaborate and expand much more deeply so that you can get a fuller understanding of some of the content and topics that y'all have found on TikTok and really enjoyed, apparently. 30,000 of you in 6 months. It's pretty awesome, not gonna lie. So on today's episode, I'm going to give you some origin story of how we ended up here. Yes, you listening, me speaking, and us being on this journey now together. So it's interesting and fascinating for me that I knew that when I stepped into taking Unblock Your BS more seriously and started treating it as seriously as I felt called to, that it was really my purpose. I've known and had this idea since 2020. So my longtime mentor and my own, he can call himself a business coach, but he has done more for my life than any other individual has. I was a part of a mastermind program he had for building businesses and online businesses. And I had become very successful and kind of a big fish in my world and my industry. And in July of 2020, he had an in-person retreat in Sedona, Arizona. And for those of you who don't quite remember and recall, Arizona was the hotspot, the number one hotspot that month for COVID. And it was a very kind of dicey thing to be driving through Arizona and like going to Sedona and being in person with, I think there were 15 of us from all over the country, and we had to be very hush hush about it. And so in this mastermind, we talk about business strategy, and we have what's called hot seats, where you'll kind of experience those on the podcast where somebody comes on and they ask a question and they're in the hot seat and then they get coaching. And so it was my turn for a hot seat. And I just remember breaking down crying because I was so conflicted inside. My heart was just not in the beauty industry anymore. I hadn't been I'm formerly an esthetician, and we'll get into the story of how I went to beauty school after, being a corporate sales and marketing and new business development professional. And so I hadn't been in that industry, had my own beauty business for like 4 or 5 years at that point. And I was getting tired of telling people like, maybe you should add a caption to that post and it'll perform better. I really wanted to deep dive stuff. And my coach was amazing during this really, really tough season of running a business and an industry that was shutting down amidst a pandemic, and his perspectives. And that was the first time I really got to start to challenge my own belief systems of what I had been experiencing. And I was married for 9 years at that point, and my marriage was not doing well at all. It hadn't been for a long time. And I remember my coach kind of walking me through various different exercises and tools for me to connect with what I needed and wanted. Because if you've ever been in a long-term relationship, or you're a people pleaser, or you're codependent, or you just stop using a voice, or you've been in an abusive relationship, you lose yourself. You repress your own needs for so long that you don't think you have any anymore. And I was at that point. I knew I was unhappy. I knew right before the pandemic kicked off, my ex and I went to my favorite place in the world, Bend, Oregon, for my birthday, as like was tradition. And I had never, ever, ever done THC before, or weed. And I was so stressed. And I was like, Susie, purity, like, oh, I don't want to be a drug addict, right? God, so naive. That I on that trip was like to my ex-husband, I was like, I need something. Like, I'm going to ruin this trip with my anxiety and just being stressed, and I can't unclench. Like, my whole nervous system and body was just on lock. And so we went and found some tincture, and like I was able to relax for a couple of days and like, cool. But it didn't work when I got home. We were in California. It was perfectly legal. I had tried some there. It didn't work. Being back in my home environment didn't work. Alcohol started becoming a thing that I was starting, especially when the pandemic started. I was having a bottle of champagne by myself while I was cooking dinner. I was really using ineffective and what I call maladaptive coping skills to deal with an insane amount of stress, some of my own PTSD and trauma based on my relationship. And going to this retreat in Sedona, I had the idea for pivoting the business to do more life coaching, but I didn't know what that looked like. That felt scary. I had so much identity wrapped in this other business, and I didn't know what was going to happen with my marriage. I was severely unhappy. And so I remember that's when the idea for this came to be. I didn't know what it was. I just knew that I wanted to have conversations more about personal development, mindset, healing, but I had to go on the journey to figure out what that was and the tools. And at that same retreat was the first time I was ever walked through a breathwork ceremony. And when I say breathwork, people, I love it when first timers, when they're done with it, they go, "That was intense." Like, that's not what I thought it was. And I'm like, I know. The breathwork that we did at this and that I now facilitate is not like box breathing or Wim Hof. Wim Hof is kind of similar, but it's not like, "Ooh, let's breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4." That can be very effective for like a quick Band-Aid for what you're going through. I kind of equate that to like an albuterol inhaler. If you're having an asthma attack, it'll address it in the moment, but it's not like getting to the root of your nervous system and rewiring shit. The type of breath work that I do and that I did that day was an hour-long session of specific breathing patterns to put you in a triggered, activated state and then get you out of it. And you have such a full body release. And I had no idea what was actually happening at that time. And now I get to experience it quite regularly. But your nervous system and your body, or your soma, knows how to release stress and trauma. It's designed to release it. Our modern day brain and society and culture represses it. We don't want to hear about your emotions. We don't want you're crazy, you're unhinged, you're an aggressive person. Like, we have all of these different judgments that we put on people with emotions that are negative, but that is actually your body trying to discharge energy that's trapped in there. And so often these traumas, and we'll kind of talk more about traumas over time, but I look at it as big T trauma and little t trauma. Big T trauma are the obvious ones: rape, molestation, child abuse, any sort of abuse, car accident, death, loss, you name it. And then there's little t trauma, which is anything that is uncomfortable that gets stuck in your body. And trauma is subjective, right? So what may be traumatic to me is not traumatic to you, and vice versa. So anybody's, and I find this more that people do this to themselves, like, well, it really wasn't that big of a deal. Like, so my dad yelled at me and left me at the gas station one day because he was drunk or something like that. Who knows? But they almost like gaslight themselves into not thinking that that experience had an impact. Yet 99.9999% of the time when I get on coaching calls with clients and we start to uncover where root beliefs that are not helping them in their current life, we go back to the root of whatever the situation was where they created that belief, the tears come. Men and women experience this. And that to me is my signal as a coach. That's where the belief and the pain is. And we have a pain associated to that memory. And so going through breath work allows your body in a safe container, in a safe environment, in a controlled environment, to release the repressed energy and to release the repressed emotion. And it really was life-changing for me, just even to go through that one session. So the immediate result I had was so the second half is usually calming, and you actually almost kind of feel high. You get kind of floaty. Sometimes you have an out-of-body experience, or you just feel the most clear you've ever felt, both in your body and in your mind. It's so juicy goodness. It's like dessert at the end of the meal. And I had remembered, I kind of almost floated up in the sky of Sedona over this house we were staying in. And this, you can call it God, you can call it higher self, you can call it universe, whatever you subscribe to, was like, this is where you need to be. You need to stay above and not get dragged down to the 3D world and the problems that the world is living in. You belong up here where you can see clearly. And whatever and whoever is going to bring you down, wow, I'm having like a full circle moment because I forgot about this vision. Whoever's going to bring you down, we need to eliminate, because you have a higher purpose, essentially. And that was when I had the idea to move across the country. So we were living in Southern California at the time. And California was like the worst lockdown, right? It was like Arizona, California, New York, like everything was just locked down. And it had been for quite some time. And I immediately after that stopped biting my nails. I'd been a lifelong nail biter, and I have not bitten my nails since. And that was 4 years ago. And so that's how powerful even just one session of breath work is. I've had many, 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 many clients tell me that one session of breath work is like 10 years of therapy in one session. And it doesn't necessarily require you to go back into the trauma, right? It's your body discharging. And then you start to feel like, oh my God, this is how I'm supposed to feel, like this clear, this lightness, this ease, this rest, like, holy cow. So fast forward to the last several years, we moved across the country trying to salvage a marriage that was already heading for decline, moved away from our support system with two very young children. I think when we moved, they were 2 and 5. And then we got COVID almost 2 months after moving here. And I was so depressed. I was looking at taking the equity we had gotten from the sale of our house in California and going to mommy rehab, except that I didn't have a substance abuse problem. And I remember talking to one of the intake administrators going, I don't have a substance abuse problem, but legit, I'm so desperate for this that I will go get one if that's what's required. That's how bad it was. And I was going to drop 30 grand on going to basically just away for 6 weeks from the life I had created. Oh, I was so desperate for it. And I didn't end up doing that. And again, my coach stepped in and we had 2 back-to-back days of an amazing conversation, which I will elaborate on. But basically, this was the first time he put me in my power of my own choices and how my choices led to this moment, and taking 100% radical responsibility 100% of the time for the life I was living. And that's a hard thing to get to. People oftentimes in our world want to play the victim to everything that's happened to them. And that is not somebody who is necessarily self-aware. I've found that self-aware has layers and levels to it, but somebody who wants to look at everybody else as the problem and they're the victim, that is somebody who is not empowered, because they can't control everybody else. And so they just kind of stay stuck in this mindset and this victim of everything bad happens to me. And I certainly wasn't immune to that. And when I'll share kind of the exercise my coach ran me through, and I do put some clients through this too, is he said, I want you to say, I choose to have a husband with PTSD, because my husband had PTSD, because I choose to have a husband with PTSD. And so I said it, and he's like, how do you feel? And I was like, I don't choose that. I don't know what you're talking about. This is ridiculous. And he said, I want you to say it again. So I said it again. And I said, no, I don't choose this. I don't want him to have PTSD. Like, this wasn't a choice that he has PTSD. He has it. And he said, I think you're putting the emphasis on the wrong word. I want you to emphasize choose. And so when I did that, I said, I choose to have a husband with PTSD because I choose to have a husband with PTSD. And when I said it the third time, that's when it clicked. I can't choose or control that my husband had PTSD, but I can choose and control that I have a husband, who has PTSD. Right. So there were factors that were out of my control and out of my choice, the PTSD, but there were factors in my control and in my choice. And in that moment, he was working me through it, figuring out what it is that I want. And I said, yes, I want to continue to choose this husband because I believe in marriage and I believe in my commitment. And I believe, that this is what love is and better for worse and all that kind of stuff. Like, I justified my choice and I owned my choice. And I knew I could make a different choice at any point. But it was my choice to choose a partner and have a husband who had these certain challenges. And about 6 months later, I made a different choice. So we'll get into kind of the divorce story some other time. But that was really where I recognized just how much my life had unfolded by my choices I wasn't super aware of, or choices based on beliefs that were not serving me. And this really began a really intensive self-awareness and healing journey. And certainly the divorce forced me to look and gave me time and space to also look at ways that I had contributed to my marriage declining, because I blamed a lot of it on him, right? Being the victim. I was the victim. and really taking, again, radical responsibility for how my life had unfolded and the decisions I made. Even going back to when we first met and the first initial months of us dating, when I had gut moments of like, this is not going to be a good partner for you, I ignored those instincts because I loved him. And I ignored some, cold feet before we got married. Maybe those were signs that wasn't the right partner for me. And I certainly don't regret the decisions that I made, because I am so thankful and grateful, even for the pain of the miscarriage and all of the destructive patterns I experienced in my marriage and losing myself, because the journey to heal and rediscover myself and now use those same tools to help others, my pain has served a greater purpose. And that's really how we come to being here today, is starting to share my journey, my perspectives, the beliefs that held me back, and how for you to challenge your own beliefs to live the life that you want, not based on external stuff that you can't control, but the internal stuff that you are only responsible for. That's really the premise of Unblock Your BS, the belief systems that are keeping you stuck, struggling, and suffering. Because my God, when you can hack your own brain to really create the world, the reality, but more importantly, the feelings you want to feel, it's game changing. It's life changing. My mental health is way more in my control. It's a freaking full-time job. Anybody who thinks that maintaining healthy, solid mental health isn't number one priority probably has a lot of ups and downs in their mental health. It really is a full-time job, but I have built a life around that, and a life that supports me being stable in my mental health. I have a lot of people riding on me, right? By design. I love it. But when I start to tank, other people tank, and I want to make sure that I am solid. So I will be sharing those tools that I stay rock solid. I honor my body when it needs rest, learning how to connect with my body, learning how to connect with other people, how to have high standards for yourself of who you allow have access to you, how to get out of toxic situationships, relationships, marriages, how to communicate effectively with a partner you do want to stay with, what life after divorce or the decision making up to a divorce, whether that's the right thing for you or not. We are going to cover it all here on this podcast. And most importantly, I have a request, because the real gift for me is when I get to talk with people that are struggling and suffering. And there's a lot of in real time problems that you're facing that I can support you with and start to get you out of and perspective shift with you. And so I want you to be a guest on the podcast. I want your problems to be addressed on the podcast so that they can get solved. And there's quite a few ways that we can do that. We can do that through you writing in what your challenges are. We can do that with you recording a voice memo for me, and I will play the voice memo on the podcast and then give you my response. Or for those of you that are really willing to be brave and share your story so that it can impact thousands of other people, you can come on live and get coaching with me for free on the podcast. So you can go to unblockyourbs.com/podcast and look at all of the different ways that you can submit questions or get coaching from the podcast and follow along on the journey as we start to get into more episodes. If you are a subject matter expert, or you don't necessarily want coaching, but you want to be part of these conversations, or you have something to contribute and share, I'd love to have you on. This is not going to be main like the Tara show. That's not the intention. I want to make sure that the version of me 4 years ago, that if she could have had a resource and been a fly on the wall to the conversations this version of me has, that she would find hope, inspiration, that there was a better way to live life and view life, that she could take her power back and not be so sad, not feel so destroyed, and not feel so hopeless. And so if you're in that state, I hope that this is the life raft and the life preserver that you need to start to get your head above water. Start to take a deep breath in and find yourself again. So thanks for being along on the journey. We're just getting started, and I'll see you in the next episode. Have a good one.